Well, good morning, all. Maybe afternoon for some of you. I know we have an international audience here for this second live from Malibu April short course class. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, and we're coming to you live here from LC 155, right off the Gulls Way patio here on our Malibu campus. This is the second class of the day, The Roots of Capitalism versus Socialism, with Dr. Gordon Lloyd, Professor Emeritus and Doxon Professor of Public Policy here at Pepperdine. This class is essentially a distillation of one of Dr. Lloyd's most beloved classes here at the Graduate Policy School on political economy, but obviously takes on a set of issues that could not be more contemporary. A defining rivalry in 2013. Dr. Lloyd co-wrote those books with David Davenport, another past professor here at the School of Public Policy, as well as former president here at Pepperdine. Again, this is a short course, the first of 4 classes that we are hosting on Fridays throughout the month of April. It's based on Dr. Lloyd's class, Political Economy, which he has taught here for many years at the Policy School. But it's also related to a book I want to promote here, frankly, and let you all know about, that he has co-written with Nicholas Capaldi, the 2 narratives of political economy, which is available on Amazon. There's also a second book related to that, which Dr. Lloyd will talk about. Just a little bit about the logistics here of these short course classes. I know some of you may just be joining us after participating in the first class of the morning with Dr. McClay, but for those of you who are joining us here for the first time, we are using the Zoom interactive online platform to deliver this class. We are going to switch very shortly to the live video stream here with Dr. Lloyd here in the classroom. But the format of the class will be 45 minutes or so of lecture, and then we're reserving the last 15 minutes of the class for your questions and answers. Because of the size of this class, and I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 registrations for this particular class, I'll be taking your questions in via the chat feature. Again, if you have not used Zoom before, at the bottom of your screen, if you scroll your cursor down, you will see an icon that says chat. If you click on that, you can simply type in your questions, and those can be addressed either directly to me or to the audience at large. I invite you to post those questions throughout the beginning portion of this lecture, but we will be addressing those questions in turn in the last 15 minutes of the class. So thanks so much for joining us here at Pepperdine. This is an example of one of the unique classes that we teach here at the Policy School with one of its most beloved faculty members, Dr. Gordon Lloyd. I will stop the screen share here, and we will go directly to our video and Dr. Lloyd. And so without further ado, welcome, Dr. Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Dean Pete. It's good to see you again. This isn't an American story in itself. A long time, Pete was a student, and then my graduate assistant, and now he's my boss. I mean, where else in the world can you see that? If it's not the roots of capitalism, it's certainly the roots of America. Well, no, thank you. It's good. It's good to see you again. All right, this is, as Pete said, this is one of 4 that will be taking place. And this one has the title Roots of Capitalism and Socialism. And what I want to do is to look at 2 thinkers. These are not all the thinkers that there are, but we've got to start a story somewhere, and we've got to be able to be edited in 45 minutes. So it depends upon whether I've chosen the right thinkers and the right subjects as to whether the 45 minutes is a bust or whether it goes pretty well. So I have chosen to start our story, not with Aristotle or Plato or Aquinas. I'm starting our story with John Locke in the 17th century and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Frenchman, in the 18th century. And I would say that they present 2 narratives of political economy. And one we might call the liberty narrative. Of course, there's equality in it, but the liberty narrative from John Locke. And the other one we can call the equality narrative, which of course there's some things dealing with liberty in there. But, and again, I repeat, I'm not intending in these 4 weeks to provide an encyclopedia comprehensive, well, how about this person? How about that person? That's what you do in your spare time. I just try to get the main characters as right as I can. So we've got John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one presenting the liberty narrative, or in terms of the title for our time together, the origin of capitalism. And in terms of our titles today, we're going to say that Rousseau is the originator of what we might call socialism. There's lots to argue about here, but we've got to get started. In the second class next week, I'm going to take what I think is probably one of the best and most available defenses of what we might call capitalism, although he never used the word capitalism. It's Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And I will go through certain sections of that with you. And in the third week, I thought we would present one of the strongest cases for socialism, even in its most extreme form, which would be Karl Marx. And then in our 4th and final session, we would come back now to the roots of the American order. How does how do these people and these topics fit into the American story? And that is what we're going to end with. All right, so let's begin with Locke and Rousseau. I won't tell you a lot about their biographies, but I'm going to focus on ideas. Why am I starting with them? Well, the answer basically is that Locke and Rousseau took economics out of the household. The original meaning of the word economics was oikonomos, which meant ruling the household in Greek. It was deemed to be a thing that was fit for slaves or fit for people who didn't have much time and leisure to have talent. So they had to have a household, and then those who could live out of the household did the politics. So the politics was a high thing, but required economics to be the necessary condition in order to have leisure. There was no idea, but certainly not in Aristotle, that the economic life was the best life. In fact, Aristotle makes distinctions between certain kinds of economic life. Some are more natural than others. Agriculture, for example, more natural than manufacturers. So that we don't get exactly, shall we say, a resounding picture in favor of living an economic life or the pursuit of pleasure and comfort and improvement out of, say, Aristotle. We don't get that much out of Aquinas either, or the church fathers, because if for one reason, there's something called the just price, or the just wage, or the just interest rate. And who decides what is just and what is not just? The answer is the church fathers. And so usury, that is making money off of money, is not deemed to be natural or a proper way for people to live. We have to break that. And I think the way I'm going to try to show you how to break, how that is broken is by first concentrating on Locke. And I'm going to sort of push forward very quickly to our last lecture together, which is the Constitution, and invite you, after we're done, to focus on one line which is often overlooked in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which lists the powers of Congress. The one part that's overlooked is that Congress shall have the power to promote the sciences and the useful arts by giving patents. But I just want to drop the line patents for the moment and say that Congress has given the power to encourage the sciences and the useful arts. Why? Because a certain kind of life is anticipated where the science and the useful arts now become helpful to our condition in life. If I were to summarize the whole purpose of John Locke's second treatise on government, it is to make the case for the promotion of the sciences and the useful arts. And if I were to make a one-line sentence to describe Jean-Jacques Rousseau, it is the case against the useful arts and sciences. So the arts and sciences stand at the sort of the focus of this contention between capitalism and socialism, including who owns them and to what purpose are they going to be put. Now, Locke starts off again with trying to imagine a world in which there is no government, no society. What would natural man look like? And the answer is in a state of nature with certain natural rights that come from God, and therefore human beings are entitled to pursue that right to life, and they must have then the liberty to pursue that happiness. And that happiness is an earthly sort of happiness to improve their condition in life. So far from God cursing Adam and Eve into work because of an original sin, under Locke, God has bestowed on Adam and Eve the right to cultivate the land. And although God gave the land in common to human beings, he could not possibly, says Locke, have given them the land in order to waste. And so if you put your own effort into the land and you draw acorns from it, those acorns are yours. Why do they become yours? After all, weren't they there in the common? Yes, but you put your own effort and labor into it, and therefore it is yours. But what about other people? Which is often called the tragedy of the commons, where you take something and you don't have things left over, which is part of the socialist argument. And Locke would say, well, as long as there's a lot left over, who am I hurting? In fact, I'm helping, because now comes the invention of money. With the invention of money, I can trade. I just don't have to barter my acorns for your apples. I may not like apples. So if I have money, we could barter that, and therefore things won't spoil. And I can then, well, down the line, you've got refrigeration, and then you got trade. So that the idea of working on the land, so that land is a factor of production, as the economists say, but labor is also a factor of production, because without labor, nothing would get produced. And then with equipment or machinery, or what is now comes to be known as capital, human beings can use their capital that they've acquired and appropriated on the land to produce more and more and more. But isn't there going to be some inequality around here? And Locke says, of course there's going to be inequality. But so what? If I manage to become better off and in the process make you better off, hasn't the human condition improved? Why do we all have to be equal? I mean, I have equal opportunity, but this equal outcome requires somebody, somewhere, to suppress the inclinations of human beings to improve themselves. See, and I think that is very important for Locke. Human beings have a natural inclination to improve their condition, and they have the tools to which to do it. So you get the origin of private property. And then you ask the question, what kind of government then is necessary or congenial to that kind of activity, to using the arts and the sciences, arts of agriculture, sciences, to putting spades in grounds and getting the machinery, all those kinds of things. What is it that entitles me to that? And then what kind of government? And the answer, says Locke, is a limited government. And they limit the government so that the whole purpose of life is not to live, is not that government will be doing things for us, but we'll be doing things for ourselves. There are certain areas in life where there are very naughty people, and they will steal rather than work. And one of the roles of government then is to, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cheat, and if you do, into jail you go. And that basically is the purpose of government, to secure rights to property, rights to life, and the right to pursue happiness. And within that framework, then we have the right to choose the form of government we shall, under which we shall live. But what if something goes wrong in Locke's story? Well, that becomes the question, where is the likelihood that something's going to go wrong? And in the Locke story, it is the people who run the government themselves. They will become corrupt through power. So one of the answers is we have annual elections, and where annual elections end, tyranny begins. Well, you know, that we could play around with that, as we will see in lecture 4. The framers played around with that and extended from annual elections to biannual elections, and then to 4-year elections, etc. But the basic reason for short terms in office was to try to prevent the corruption that power brings to those in government. So that where is the danger to private life, private property? It's in effect the government. So you get that story. Well, that's the Locke story in 5 minutes. There's all kinds of things that we can do with that, and I hope you are open to filling in here, filling in there. To make a very quick summary, God gave the earth to man in common, but he gave it to the rational and the industrious, not to the slothful and lazy. Therefore, work itself is encouraged, expected, and people to take care of their own individual self.
Now, Professor Lloyd, just a quick point on that. So it's still Locke's thesis that it is actually in the best interest of everyone, the talented and the not, that this kind of scenario environment be created, because if everyone has the opportunity to pursue their happiness, then everyone in the end will benefit more than a simple, more authoritarian, centralized structure of dictating what people should be doing.
That is correct. And if you want Locke's sort of historical proof, Locke is not big on historical proof. He says, imagine. I mean, how can I prove that all men are created equal? And the angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. Isn't that true? Yeah, that's self-evident. Well, I mean, it's kind of difficult for us to kind of grasp that, but he's coming out of a Newtonian framework. Whereas so who's he arguing against? He's arguing against the notion of land is being passed down in feudalism from one generation to another generation. It's known as primogenitor, primo, firstborn, usually men. And the firstborn male will acquire the property of the father. On what ground? The answer is because I was the firstborn male. There is no merit, there is no work, there is no effort involved to do that. And so what do you get? You get 1 or 2 lords and the rest of us serfs. And so the gap between the lifestyle of the lords and the lifestyle of the serfs is so overwhelming that you have to ask the question, what justifies that? And Locke's answer is it can't be justified. The only justification for the ownership of property is that you work for it and you have enough left over for others. And if you put in the arts and sciences, then we will all rise. It's not a zero-sum game. We will all rise. So instead of thinking about how badly off you are compared to the richest person, think how well off you are with regard to what your life would have been in feudalism.
Mm.
I mean, your parents would have been serfs. Come on, give me a break. And there was no immigration. There was no ocean to cross to come to America. Or really, you get stuck. So you're stuck with aristocracy, primogenitor, land. So one of the questions, why should there be ownership in land which is given in common?
Mm.
The second is, why is it that one monarch dies and the monarch, and then we have monarchy again? Then another monarch. It's always primogenitor, the firstborn, right? Unless die, and then it becomes a queen. But there's no, I mean, not on merit, right? Or consent. It's basically, that's the tradition. So if we want to start, where do we start our story? We could indeed start our story with Aristotle, etc. But we'd never get to Locke by the time this hour is over. So many pit stops along the way. So we've got to start with the idea of this tradition that monarchy is best and we don't question it, and aristocracy is best and we don't question it, has got to be challenged. Mm-hmm. And so Locke presents this model of the rational in an industrious life within a context of limited political government, which is governed by the consent of the governed by annual elections, and that you can remove those in office for malfeasance, etc. Mm-hmm. And then there's a link in Locke to religious liberty. It's very interesting how the three are interrelated. Mm-hmm. Why should we have the Catholic Church or the Church of England deciding whatever the heck it is and how we worship God or not worship God? Just like the monarch, just like the aristocracy, we have a monarch in the same thing within the church. Right. So Locke's case against the church is religious toleration. Why shouldn't I be able to worship God as I see fit? So you get the right to private property, the right to choose your government, and the right to conscience. And the three are linked and they're intertwined. You take one of those away, then the other two pillars are going to have to do so much more work. Mm. I mean, that is one of the strongest cases for capitalism. It's not raw money, I want it, such and such, but it's attempt to produce the society in which progress, human progress, the improvement in the human condition is deemed to be important. And life on this earth need not be a vale of tears. So Rousseau. Well, it's very different. Rousseau says, let's begin at the beginning. And so you've got two beginnings going on here. And he says, in the beginning, imagine that we're a bunch of like nomads and tribes wandering around without the arts and sciences. And this is what the natural condition is like. The noble savage. The savage, instead of being, Locke would criticize the savage life. Rousseau would say, now, wait a minute. If the savage life is the first life and the natural life, what was good about it? And he paints this rosy picture that life was good, people felt good about each other, they had sympathy, they were sensitive, and they didn't go after killing, they were all vegetarians. They didn't go and kill animals and do all that kind of stuff. And they lived on the land and they were very, very happy. Well, why did this all go wrong? The introduction of the arts and sciences and private property. And what is private property, says Rousseau? It's not, I work, therefore I eat. It is, you work, therefore I eat. So the origin of private property for Rousseau is very, very questionable. It is in fact a ruse where a few people are smart enough to acquire the obedience, not the consent so much, the obedience of the many who are stupid to let them run the show. So immediately we've got a different understanding of the origin of private property. From Locke, it's a result of hard work. We can all lift up. Rousseau, it's the basis of a lie. So when you're going to talk about capitalism, Rousseau is talking off with a basic premise that capitalism is a lie.
Is it fair to say, though, in the origin story, that as much as Locke references Adam and Eve, that Locke is really referencing at the time, a current state of affairs, which was this feudalistic system, whereas Rousseau is actually going further back and appealing to a time that actually never really was, and indicting the present by referencing this noble savage era where we all.
I think that's very insightful. That somehow the past for Rousseau is a lot nicer than how Locke presents it. Locke's presentation of the past is that we're all free, but we're all poor. We can't eat. So what we have to do is to become well off enough that we can survive. One other point I would make. So yeah, I think this whole idea of return to this, and a lot of socialists have this vision of the past, and you can still see it around, where is an objection to introducing new machinery. So have the lost way of life, or the simple life, and then certainly in communist China and Russia, the glorification of the peasant, that kind of life with the peasant.
But it's never by the peasants. It's usually by a centralized government.
Well, that becomes part of our. Yeah. You're not going to have to wait for that one. No, but that's exactly where we're going.
Yeah.
That you start off with this is the worker state or the peasants, right? You have a hammer and a sickle. You got everything is fine, and then you say, well, now who's running the show? We the people are running the show, apparently. But that gets into some interesting.
Well, that's a very interesting point about the hammer and sickle, right? That's a reference to two kind of manual labor tools.
Yes.
And those are the things that are held up, obviously, by communism from a state kind of imagery perspective as being things that should be celebrated.
Yes. Where's the dollar bill for Locke?
Yes.
I mean, if you want to talk about this, the Green Society for Locke, it's the dollar bill.
Green New Deal.
And for Rousseau, it's the environment.
That's true. And everybody with a hammer and sickle, and forget the actual machinery and the arts.
That's right. That's right. Well, hammer and sickle, interesting. It starts off with a sickle. Yeah. And then the question is, well, what do you do about the hammer? Well, you join them, and that becomes a very tenuous joining of workers and peasants.
Wow.
But Rousseau isn't thinking about joining workers and peasants at this particular stage. He's trying, I think, to get the story off to the right start. And the right start is to demonstrate that private property is theft. And once you do that, and then to show that the arts and sciences, far from encouraging and improving the life of human beings, has in fact debased them. Why? Because they bring us clothes. And with clothes come puffery and refinery, and we can hide things, and we can pretend to be who we are not. Whereas the noble savage is pretty much naked, and you see what you get, right? And therefore it's honest. There's no attempt to misguide. So the origin of private property then is theft. Okay, to Rousseau. So what about government? The origin of government is theft, because you get a few of these private property people getting the rest of the crowd to obey the rule by the few who are now in charge of things. And so the few who are rich in economics now control the politics, to the detriment of the many who are poor. And so now we have to start the story. What is the story? The struggle of the many for their existence, and the unfairness of property holdings. So Locke had only changed feudalism by changing who owns. right? But it's still going to be apparently a few. Locke makes the argument that the rational and industrious are the many, because the people want to be rational and industrious, right? Rousseau says the rational and industrious are the few who want to shaft the many.
So while Locke might be allowed to open up opportunity to a little bit more than under the feudalist system, Rousseau says that's still going to be
Inequality.
right.
So all you've done is replace feudalism with bourgeoisism. And so that's still a problem. And inequality remains a problem. And fairness remains a problem. Well, what about religion? Well, that's a ruse too.
To Rousseau.
To Rousseau. Yeah. Yes, it is. But so is there a genuine property? Is there a genuine government? And is there a genuine religion? And his answer is yes. Genuine property is where the property is owned by the entire community, and therefore put forward for the public good. Proper politics and government is where we choose competent people who are our comrades, who know what is not only what is best for us, but they are us. They don't form a different class. They are us, and they look out for us. And so we don't have these nasty wars. And they will seek the concept of the general will. This is a concept that's very difficult to understand, but I'll be trying to be brief. It's not the same as majority rule, which Locke would go in favor of. But if the majority is bad, then you can revolt against the majority in the name of natural rights, the right to property, the right to life. That's always off the table. The majority or the minority can't touch that. Well, for Rousseau, the people can touch anything. There's no such thing as holding back. So so the proper way of entering into society, so that we have the nature and its noble savage. We have the Locke story. Rousseau says no to the Locke story, presents this idea of, well, what would a good entry be? The answer is you leave everything behind. That is, if you have a glove, if you have a knife, if you have anything, leave it behind. You all enter naked. You don't say, I'm going to enter, but I'm going to keep this back. So everything.
A very religious.
That's right. That's right. Well, so now you can anticipate the third point, which is what kind of religion is Rousseau going to suggest? It is going to be a general will religion in which the country itself becomes lauded. And so there's no idea of, I have a right to conscience if I'm not going to go along with that. Because that's an invention. You know, you're in or you're out. You're not halfway in. So with Locke, you're halfway in. I mean, I'm going to give up those rights which are necessary in order for you to govern. All the rest I'm going to keep for myself and my family, and we're going to make the best of it because that's what we're doing. Again, that's the way of life. For Rousseau, you give up everything. So there's no appeal outside of the general will. The general will is never wrong. And then you have the general government. Well, that's sort of the two models. And, you know, there's, as I said at the beginning, we can break this down into various parts and look at certain sections. And I think they have the capitalistic model has an economic, political, and religious side to it. And I think the same thing would go for the socialist model, certainly at the beginning. And then you could see, and I'm not saying that these two models stay the same, right? I mean, Adam Smith comes along and he has to deal with the critique of Locke. And other people come along and they have to deal with the critique of Rousseau. Right. So that the story, the narrative continues So it's not, I'm not saying that these two concepts are stuck, but that's, I think, somewhere where we can begin to see the unfolding. And we can almost, I think, now, hopefully, say, where is Smith going to go with this? And if he doesn't go with this, why is Lloyd so wrong?
Now we have about 10 minutes before we get to Q&A, but I want to take this moment just to, as you set the table here, as kind of as we have said in the title of this class, the roots of capitalism versus socialism, to at least at this point recognize that there really is a significant difference between how the individual is understood in the Lockean model,
Yes,
versus the Rousseauian model.
yes.
And I'm sure that most of us here in the class, which we will all be students before you, Professor Lloyd, are beginning to project into where we are in present tense, right? With these categories of progressivism, democratic socialism, so on and so forth. But it seems a little bit ironic, if not inconsistent, that most of the arguments on the left seem to be about this appeal to equality, but there is a sacrifice that needs to happen for that supposed equality to happen. And that is essentially what is the role of the individual. And we see that in the table that you set for us here in Rousseau's model. And so tell us a little bit about, we mentioned before about Locke speaking into a feudal culture. Who is, at least in his time, who is Rousseau attempting to influence?
Well, that's very good. I think he's trying to influence those people who are going to try to jump on the Locke bandwagon. The arts and sciences, that the 18th century is the age of enlightenment, that it's ships and factories and everything and going up, and he's warning that those people are going to jump on this Locke bandwagon. Stop before it's too late. And I think that basically is what it is. There's another dimension to it, which is not easy to unravel. And that is, what is Rousseau's role in the French Revolution? And that's something that is hotly debated, because the French Revolution is against feudalism and aristocracy, and has a lot of elements of Locke in it, certainly at the beginning. So, but Rousseau is often portrayed as the father of the French Revolution, whereas Locke is portrayed as the father of the American Revolution. So what is revolutionary about Rousseau is that there's a certain egalitarianism in Rousseau, no aristocracy, no feudalism, but there is a simplicity to life. And if for Locke, the number one virtue is self-reliance, I think the number one virtue for Rousseau is sensitivity to others.
Now, do you sense that in Rousseau's writings, in the discussion of the general will, you know, in so many ways we are looking back, and we know the amount of lives that have been lost in trying to realize a general will, right? When we look at the various manifestations in some ways of Rousseau's picture, which we'll delve more deeply into when we go to Marx in session 3. But do you think Rousseau had a real sense of what it would take to realize this concept of a general will in reality?
Well, again, that's a very good question. Because are we starting from scratch? And if you start from scratch, it's a lot easier than if you move into something that's already there. You have to tear it down and you have to compromise with it, which is fascinating because Locke and Rousseau start with something that's not there. That they start with in their imagination. Imagine the noble peasants, the noble savage. Imagine the industrious human being.
Yeah.
So, and you think, well, what kind of reality, historical reality is that? And then you have to stop and say, well, where do we find the truth? And clearly, for me, Locke and Rousseau are not going to be finding the truth in history. That comes later. So today we even just snap up, well, history will tell and history will decide and history will do this.
Yeah.
You have to almost wait for Hegel and that historical school. This is still an abstract school of thinking that you can abstract human beings from the reality, quote unquote, around them and prove somehow that the reality around them is not right.
Mm.
And I think that's the reason for that abstraction. So that if I can show what is the right way, then is no good solid reason why you must genuflect to what is going on around you.
So this whole concept later that we see even into the 60s with this false consciousness, right? That it is a very difficult thing to take an existing human society, completely set it to scratch and begin.
Yes.
But one of the ways that you might facilitate that is if you can convince people to say, actually what is not reality.
That is correct. What is not.
Right. And so then you can begin to say, if you can make an argument for this is the real reality, so to speak, you can at least begin to make radical changes in a society.
That is correct. And then how radical and how fast. And I still leave it open as to just how far Rousseau is a great influencer on the French Revolution. But I do think that Robespierre and his notion of virtue and et cetera, and the reign of terror is justified. Violence is justified.
Well, let's get into Robespierre and the French Revolution and that piece of it. How does the French Revolution either burnish what Rousseau was arguing for or cause people to question? In other words, how well was Rousseau understood
Yeah.
in this time?
Yeah, well, that's, I think, well understood. There are a lot of people who are going down the same avenue, but not as clearly and not as deeply. And then you have people who are reacting to an event that's taking place, namely the French Revolution, and in the heat of whatever, you act. And part of the problem with my approach is that I've abstracted certain events, although at the same time, I've tempted people to look at the events that the Locke occurred. Locke occurred within late 17th century,
right,
in which he was not the only one arguing for Puritanism. The Puritans didn't mean that they were against work, right? And Locke was not able to publish his 3 books on money and on politics and religion at the same time. He had to wait until the monarchy in Britain was overthrown, etc. So it's not that Locke caused the revolution as much as he provided a very good argument for why, and it may have taken 100 years before the Americans picked it up. Okay, Rousseau was arguing at a time when the French were really questioning the role of the church, the role of the monarch, and the role of the aristocracy, and what happened to the people, and they were being taxed heavily. And so there was no concept of the general will going on. There was no concept of people, maybe we're living like peasants, but the rest of them aren't living like peasants. They're living in a carnival with masks. So I can't answer your question specifically as to whether the actors themselves, before they went into battle, picked up Rousseau. But those arguments were around, and I'm using Locke and Rousseau as starting points,
Yes.
composite metaphors, so to speak, to help us get through this.
Well, and that actually leads to one of the questions that we have from our online students here about the connection directly between Rousseau and Marx. You know, as noted in the question, there aren't a lot of references by Marx to Rousseau, but certainly given the table that you've set here, there's so much resonance there. Your reading of Marx, which again, we'll get more into in session 3, but just as a way to kind of tease that, how do Marx and Rousseau, or Marx specifically, how does he understand Rousseau, and how much of an influence directly do you think that he is?
Yeah, well, this is good question. Whereas the Locke model is almost all English, and perhaps a bit Dutch, and then comes over to America, the Rousseau model is French, which immediately shows you got a channel between France and England. But Marx is Germany. So you've got movements that are going on in both France and Germany. And Germany wasn't even a nation. And France was a nation, but in a crumbling form. And the person who influenced Marx the most was Hegel. And the questioner is correct that Rousseau does not play a big, huge, obvious part in Marx, but you can see it. I mean, it's there. So here's the link between sort of Hegel and Rousseau. Rousseau does not have a dialectic. That is, Hegel says that in the beginning you have, say, agrarianism, and somehow that changes into capitalism. But that is not the end of history. Capitalism will change into socialism or whatever. And that model of an evolutionary model, maybe even a revolutionary model with human action and changing, that I think is what Marx learned from Hegel. You also learn from Darwin, the notion of the evolution of the species, and that kind of, and by the way, capitalism was undergoing that same thing with the Herbert Spencer and saying the survival of the fittest, and government shouldn't be doing anything because this is nature's way. So I think Rousseau and Locke have an understanding of nature, sort of abstract, and you can understand it. I think Marx has, and it comes out of the German school particularly, an understanding of nature as nature changes. And we have to understand, evolve. So it's no longer physics, which becomes the model, it's biology.
Interesting.
So yes, the question is correct. And every time I read Marx, I see Rousseau. Even though he does footnote Rousseau, such and such and such and such. But you can't read, but he's not just simply being a copycat to Rousseau, because he has something that Rousseau does not have, which is the dialectic. Which is why why Marx could answer your question that you asked better than Rousseau himself could, when you said, how is Rousseau going to put this into practice? Yeah. Marx will say it will come, inevitably, or it will do such and such. Rousseau can't say that. Yes. So Rousseau is stuck with some kind of, you have to have a violent revolution or something in order to try to start off from the beginning and start afresh.
This is a huge point, Professor. This ability for the dialectic and this understanding of history, which we take for granted now in phrases like history will judge us, history tells us, this kind of using history as a way of forecasting something that will come. The moral arc of the universe bending in a certain direction where certain people know where it's bending and other people don't.
Yes.
There is a power to that in dictating present actions.
Yes.
That obviously Marx took to say, it might not be the case now, but we know where this is going. Do we? Well, he seems to. Rousseau doesn't have that. right? Rousseau is actually looking back,
Yes.
using history as a way of saying, but there was this perfect time when we were all walking around naked and being vegetarian. And so this weird, we've just come from this first class of the morning was the importance of understanding history to put the present into some context. But the power of using history to revolutionize societies is something that's evident in both Rousseau in appealing to a time that really never was, but also, as we'll see in session 3, for Marx to use it as predicting a time that will come.
You see, that is a very insightful remark, because at one level, history is talking about the past. In Marx's hands, it's talking about the future.
Yeah. And uses that as a way of forcing his ideas into a society.
Yes.
Now, how then does Locke understand? He doesn't have the dialectic.
No, he does not have the dialectic, but he does think that change is possible and change is desirable. And there are 3 areas of change. If human beings just read me and get it. It's in religion. We could all become Protestant. 2, in politics, we could all become Democratic Republicans. And in 3, economics, we could all become self-reliant capitalists, take care of ourselves, and it spreads the wealth. But what's wrong with such a society driven by the useful, by science and the useful arts? So I don't know that there's a dialectic that it has to come, but it can come.
Yes.
And if you take a look at, and when pushed, you say a lot, well, was there ever such a thing as a state of nature that you're describing? And you say, I really don't care whether it actually existed or not. It exists in my mind, and therefore it's true.
Well, and this is a question, another question from J.W. Kang on the chat line, which you're striking at right now. Did Rousseau really believe in the noble savage, or was that just a metaphorical tool? In some ways, the way the dialectic is, right? Is it a tool for propounding and arguing for his view of society?
Well, when you push Locke a little bit further than I don't care, right? You'd say America. America is open, it's a beginning, a new beginning. Okay? If you ask Rousseau, do you care, but did this ever exist? He said Polynesian islands. And if you take a look at all those islands out there, right, with Aborigines and the natural life, and all what happens with the arts and sciences is that they destroy them. Go down, bring disease, destroy them, tell them that they're savages, and take away their life in the name of progress. So I think Rousseau is more interested in trying to provide an actual example, Polynesia, than Locke is. But in the end, I think the idea is, the question to keep in mind when answering that question is, are the arts and sciences helpful or hurtful?
Yeah. And what does it take then, as you posited in the beginning, what kind of government structure does it take to foster the arts and sciences versus preventing them?
Preventing them, and again, to go back, who owns them? Are they privately owned? In which case they may not, or probably will not, be used for the public good. Or should the public own them? In which case they will be used for the public good.
So, Professor Lloyd, we're in our last 5 minutes here. And I know that obviously we look ahead to Adam Smith next week.
Yes.
We have talked a little bit about the Rousseau Marx connection, which again we'll see in session 3, but we haven't talked a lot about the Locke-Smith connection.
That is correct.
And I wondered if you could take on just these last few minutes here just to kind of tee up our conversation for next Friday.
Well, if Marx adds a dialectic to Rousseau, Smith adds an invisible hand to Locke. That somehow there's a hand, big H, small h, that guides all of this.
Very good.
So that it may not, we may not call it a dialectic, but it's there in the universe, somehow that markets work. And so it's not just pie in the sky, whereas Locke is trying to imagine and make the case for. Smith, I think, is adding a dimension, just as Marx adds a dimension.
Now, of course, Smith, as I'm sure we'll discuss, is not just writing about the market system, but in the theory of moral sentiments, which is not as referred to as it should be, understands that there needs to be a cultural environment set around this market. And so your thoughts then on the tie-in between Locke and Smith's work in the theory and understanding it's not just the mechanisms of a free market process, but there does need to be a certain culture that in ways prepares, if not inculcates, a citizenry to handle a free market system.
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. And part of the problem in understanding it is that for many scholars, Locke is an advocate of selfishness and Smith is an advocate of selfishness. Therefore, where is the cultural infrastructure to support that selfishness? Well, I think we have to go back and figure out just how, why is trading automatically understood to be selfish? Yes, I'm looking after myself, but by trading, you are also gaining. So it is, in fact, not competition gotcha, but as much as it is cooperation, thank you.
Yes.
And I think that is the thing, it's a combination between competition and cooperation.
Yes. And the fact that there needs to be a certain culture that can do both, that has a certain set of ambitions, but at the same time understands in trust, honesty, and transparency that there needs to be a certain set of behaviors that can govern, if you will, a society that is run in a democratic capitalist way.
Well, definitely. One is that work is taken as a positive good. Taking care of oneself is a positive good. No society can exist and be defended if it doesn't take care of the down and out. And you need to take care of the down and out, but don't provide the down and out with such an incentive that you remain down and out.
Right.
You've got to have democratic government, which means frequent elections.
Yep.
And doesn't mean to say that the people themselves will elect the right people, right folks, but then that requires civic education.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I don't like to put civic education as an abstract thing, but civic education in America, civic education such and such, is that civic education has to be almost located within the confines of a country. So that civic education is, how do you live morally in a commercial society?
In a specific commercial.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, we are at our time. I want to thank you all for joining us. I know that I know that we have a number of alums here of the Graduate Policy School who are joining us, and great to see some of you registered and participating. Again, this is our second class of the day, and our next one will be starting in just about a half hour with Dr. Robert Kaufman, looking at foreign policy and major themes in American grand strategy. But I think you've got a sense here for why Dr. Lloyd is so beloved here at the School of Public Policy, really one of our founders, and in many ways speaks to the unique education that we offer here at the graduate school, understanding that the quantitative side of public policy is certainly important, but we also need to think philosophically and historically about these issues, especially in this time. So with that, I will bid you all adieu. We will look forward to seeing those of you who are going to join us in a half hour for Dr. Kaufman's class. Otherwise, we will be right back here with Dr. Lloyd next Friday at 10 o'clock Pacific time. Please have a terrific rest of your day and stay safe. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week.